Good evening. Thank you so much for coming this evening on this unseasonably cold night, shall we say. I'm Cindy Assini. I'm the supervisor of Social Studies and Gifted and Talented here in Hillsborough Township, and I have the honor tonight of introducing and presenting with Dr. Joan Rudiman. Dr. Rudiman is a friend of Hillsborough. She has consulted with the district. In fact, when the district offered a Gifted and Talented certificate program here for our teachers, she was one of the professors. She was the gifted specialist in West Windsor Plainsboro for years. She's also very active in the National History Day program, which we do offer starting at our intermediate school. So Dr. Rudiman is a wealth of knowledge, and I'm thrilled that you chose to take some time out of your evening to spend with us and discuss gifted and talented children and the gifted program here at Hillsborough. So I'm going to start the presentation and just give you a brief overview about gifted in Hillsborough. Then Dr. Rudiman will take over and tell you a little bit about the theory of gifted education, which is a field that is still emerging and a field where not everyone agrees. But we do work very closely with specialists in the field like Dr. Rudiman to have the very best program we have here designed to meet the needs of all your children. So after Dr. Rudiman shares some information, then I will sum up with the identification process, information about that here in Hillsborough, and then we'll take questions and hopefully answer and have you leave here tonight feeling like you learned what you wanted to learn and have every confidence that we're doing all we can to enrich all of our students here, and especially those who have exceptional needs. So with that being said, I'm going to start off with a little bit about the board policy, because as an employee here in Hillsborough, it's my job to do what the Board of Education asks us to do. So they have a mission statement, and the mission statement, basically to sum it all up into a word, is we want to educate leaders to be responsible and to meet their fullest potential. That wasn't actually a word, it was more of a sentence. I do apologize about that. So, as far as the board policy specifically for gifted education, we are to identify students by comparing them to their age level peers. That doesn't mean we have 20 spots in the gifted program, and if your child doesn't get one of those 20 spots, it's over. But we do test the students because we're trying to figure out who has the most exceptional needs. So every year I talk with parents who are very concerned that their child was not identified for the Gifted and Talented program yet. The good news is that we do look at children to participate every year. So if your child is not identified to participate in third grade, they may be identified every year through eighth grade. And then starting in sixth grade, there is the opportunity to participate in advanced mathematics and advanced literacy. Starting in ninth grade, there are honors courses in all the different subjects. And so the testing we do in second grade, one of the biggest misconceptions that I'm hoping to alleviate concern about tonight is that the testing we do in second grade is going to determine your child's chances in high school and college. And that is not the case. If you think about that logically for just a minute, to take a 7-year-old and say we're going to determine your college success possibilities this year, that would be quite a silly thing to do. But I do talk with parents who are legitimately concerned, well, my child wasn't identified for REACH. What does that mean about their ability to take honors classes or advanced literacy or get into a wonderful college? And I do assure you, there are multiple pathways into the program, and your child will have multiple opportunities to succeed both in their classroom and also throughout the variety of programs that we offer in Hillsborough, both academically and extracurricularly. So again, just to reiterate the board policy, we're looking for students who require modification. Students who, if we didn't make some change to their schedule, we don't believe we would be educating them well enough. So our teachers do a great job in the classroom, and as you know from going through, kindergarten, first and second grade, the teachers do all different activities with different students based on the needs of those children. We have students in the same classroom who are struggling to read, and we have students who are reading a few grade levels above their peers, and they're reading different things, and they're getting their needs met. So another thing that I often tell parents about the REACH program is that it's about 2 hours a week. So our biggest priority, working together as a team, both as administrators, teachers, and parents, is to make sure that we're meeting your child's needs every day in their classroom, perhaps through the REACH program, but that we're all working as partners. So if you or your child has a concern about what's going on in the classroom, we talk about that and we make sure that we're doing the very best we can to challenge all of our students. As far as the definition of gifted, I would be remiss if I didn't let you know that even within the field of gifted education, there is some controversy over what exactly makes a gifted child. There's no national set of tests that makes one child gifted and one child not gifted. And if you look at the percentage of gifted students across different states, and even the laws about gifted education, they're very different. If you cross the border in Pennsylvania, if your child is exceptionally at the high end of the spectrum, they would have an individualized education plan. That's where gifted education falls in Pennsylvania, is under special education law. New Jersey is completely different. All the state of New Jersey tells us is that we have to have a gifted program and we have to identify students fairly to participate in that program. That's all we have to go off of from the state. So if you look at the identification rates among different states, it varies quite extremely. So there's not necessarily a consensus in the field, but we do our best to look at the research that there is so that we can understand how we can best meet the needs of students here. So I'm going to show you a list here, and this list that I'm about to show you, you're going to think, if my child has all these characteristics, that's a good thing. So if they're interested in school, they like going to school, and they want to please their teacher, these are all great characteristics to have, and many students that have these characteristics are going to go on to amazing colleges and very successful lives. And if I had to say which side of this I think I fall under more, it would be this side of, I got along great with my teachers, except for maybe one. But don't we all have that problem, right? So I would say that, that hard work and that doing everything that you're asked is all wonderful. And I'm going to characterize this with a term that our superintendent of schools, Dr. Jordan Schiff, likes to use. He'll often ask, are we identifying the bright, shiny apples for the REACH program? And I'm going to posit that that's not always the same as the students who are gifted. So all these characteristics we could say are bright children. Now, some of these could also apply to a gifted child, but there's also a whole set of exceptionalities that can make the label of gifted or having the exceptional need that would qualify a child as gifted quite challenging. So gifted students often are very intense, or gifted children, they're very curious. They have lots of questions. Sometimes that could seem really off topic to what you're doing. They may have trouble relating to children their own age and prefer adult conversations. They're very observant, and they're the type of person who will dig in when they really want to learn something, who will be at the dinner table reading the book about space that they just cannot put down while, everyone else is having dinner and conversation. So a symbol that I like to use for these two lists actually comes from The Simpsons. So if you had to pick a Simpsons character who does everything the proper way and is liked by all of the teachers and follows all the rules. Does anyone have a Simpson character in mind? Lisa Simpson. So Lisa Simpson you could characterize as the bright child who's going to do really well in school, and man, would she be a pleasure to have at home. Gifted children can kind of be like Bart Simpson. So I had the pleasure to go to the National Association of Gifted Children conference, and I heard someone speak, Jack Andraka, and you can Google him. He's quite amazing. As a high school student, he got motivated to try to find a test for pancreatic cancer. And in the process, he decided that he was going to do experiments in his basement. So he knocked the power out to his whole neighborhood one night. He also, in his version of the story, probably had his mother put on some terrorist watch lists based on the chemicals he was ordering from odd online companies. And then he finally got lab space to create his test when he realized that it wasn't as simple as asking for cancer cells to do research on for Christmas. So you have kids that are really out of the box and out of the norm of what we would think, and those students in particular are the ones that we want to make sure that we're servicing, because they may not look like the top students in the class, but they may have some exceptionalities that really require modification to their schedule. So I wanted to present you with that contrast so you can understand both the benefits of giftedness, but also some of the difficulties and challenges, and why we do have a gifted program is to make sure that students like Bart Simpson don't fall through the cracks because they don't play school well. And Dr. Rudderman will talk a lot about the game of school. So what does that look like in the classroom? If you have a Lisa Simpson, they may need a couple repetitions to understand a concept. They're happy to get a set of questions and read about the answers in books, and they like everything presented in a logical, sequential manner. You get a Bart Simpson, and they are just so curious, and they want to ask questions. They can get things really quickly and not need the same number of repetitions that another child would need. And they really like to produce and invent and show their creativity, sometimes in ways that might not work really well when you're in a classroom of 25 elementary kids. So I do see some of you, taking notes or taping, and that's totally fine, but I do want to let you know that the presentation will be online tonight, as will a video of the presentation. So you'll have everything that you need on the district website, so you can just think about whatever questions you have and try and absorb as much as you can. So again, back to that board policy, we're comparing the students to see which ones have exceptional needs that require modification. So a lot of parents think, well, this is just a nice extra in the day. And I do encourage you to work with us as partners, because we want the best placements for your child. We don't want your child not to get services that we need, but we also don't want to place them in an environment where there may be children working at a significantly faster pace, because we don't want your child thinking, well, I'm not as good as those children. So we do a whole set of screening to do our best to identify students who really require modification to their program. What does that actually look like in practice? Well, as you're aware, in the early grades, the REACH teachers work with all of the classroom teachers. And in particular in grades 1 and 2, they push in and do a special about creative thinking skills, about fluency and originality, and all of these different REACH thinking skills. In grades 3 to 4, we do identify students more formally, and they participate in a pull-out program that's usually twice a week for a total of about 2 hours, maybe a little bit more. And the schedule depends on each elementary school, because the REACH teachers work with the classroom teachers based on the building schedule to limit the difficulty of pulling children out from their instruction in their regular classroom. And part of our identification procedures is to ensure that students won't miss anything that would be extremely important to their development in the core subject. So we do take that into account as well. Just because some of you are thinking long term, and I know that, I wanted to mention that currently the program at the 5 to 12 level looks really different than it does at the elementary program. And over time, ideally, we'll align our vision and our programming through the whole district. This is my 3rd year here in the position. So we did revise the K-4 curriculum over the past summer, and we'll continue to work to make the program the best it can possibly be. Right now, the program at the 5-8 level is a replacement social studies class where the teachers do the same social studies curriculum, but teach it in a way specifically designed for gifted students to try to meet their needs, and Dr. Rudderman will speak a bit about that as well. And then at the high school level, students self-select. They can decide they want to take a lot more math and science classes, or they want to take honors, literacy, and social studies. They want to take AP classes in certain areas, ranging from computer science to art history. So there's a lot of options for students at the upper level to choose their schedule to meet their needs. And there's also a great internship program. And if any of you, because again, you're not looking at high school scheduling anytime soon, most of you, if you do work in the area and you would ever be interested in hosting an intern, we do public interest internships with high school seniors where students will apply and indicate their career interests, and we do match them with people in the community who are willing to mentor them and give them an introduction to the field. And the students do a capstone project that's meant to leave the organization they work with a better place than they found it. So it's really a great program. And there was one young woman last year who worked with a deaf retired person. Oh, no, I'm sorry, it was a blind retired person. And she actually taught him how to use social media through adaptive technology, and now he's connected with people all over the country and world. And she was so motivated by working with him, she's considering a career in the field. So it can really be life-changing for both the participants and mentors and the students who are involved. So with no further ado, I'm going to invite Dr. Rudiman to talk to you about the whole concept of gifted and talented and how we can best meet the needs of those children.
Well, I'm delighted to be here and to lend a little bit of sensibility to a complicated topic. The idea of gifted has emerged in the last 100 years, and we've gone well beyond just understanding IQ as an IQ number, and intelligence as being much broader than that. In Hillsborough, you accept the definition of gifted as it's been established by the state of New Jersey, which was adapted from the National Department of Gifted from the Marlin Report in 1993. Gifted learners are children and youth with outstanding talent who have the potential to perform at remarkably high levels of accomplishment when compared with others of their age, experience, and environment. So a child in Hillsborough with greater exposure to education, with greater opportunity, would be compared to other children of this area rather than someone from another part of the country or from another school district. So gifted children are youth who have outstanding talents, potential to perform. They perform already or potential to perform. With remarkably high levels of accomplishment. Okay? These aren't just kids that are good, they're really extraordinary. Our work has been predicated on Joe RENZULLI'S research over the last 40 years. Joe is an outstanding leader in the field of gifted education. He's actually a native of New Jersey and started his teaching career here. He's been at the University of Connecticut for, I want to say like 40 years. And Joe has literally trained and worked with teachers of gifted children from all over the world. When he started in this field, his ideas and his theories were literally vilified by the field, those in the field of gifted education and in education. And in large part, what Joe talks about is that dichotomy between the gifted child and the bright child that Cindy put up in one of the very first slides. The Lisas of the world versus the Barts of the world. Back in when he began, when giftedness was measured by an IQ score and an IQ test, which virtually measures ability to read, write, and think logically, and you have to be highly literate to do well on the Stanford-Binet IQ test, Joe was saying we're missing people, and cites one of his things is to cite analogies from all over the world. Case in point, I can't resist. Did anybody notice the display, the STEMS display as you walked in the science display? And there was Einstein. I know there was Jane Goodall. I think there was Watson or Crick. Help me. Galileo was in there. Okay. So do we accept that those people are geniuses, right? They're the high flyers in science and technologies. Particularly Einstein is the iconic name. Would you be surprised to know that none of them were particularly strong students in school, and indeed, did not even go to traditional school. Einstein, great story, fails math in 4th grade, doesn't get into the college of his choice when he's 18 because the physics department deemed him not clever enough. Too clever by half. I mean, they just didn't understand what he was talking about. That's what Joe Renzulli has been talking about for 40 years. That if we are so narrow in our concept of what gifted looks like, with just an IQ score, we're going to miss the truly gifted in the world. He defines gifted as gifted behavior, not giftedness, but the idea of what you do with it. So gifted behavior, we can find an above average ability, is the first ring. Creativity, as in what do you do with your high ability? And then the third ring that's so essential is task commitment, which is often talked about in terms of intrinsic motivation. Task commitment. How badly do you want it? When those three things, high ability, creativity, and task commitment, intersect, you have gifted behaviors. Joe says, not all the time, not in every situation, It's not like it turns, the giftedness is there, the potential is there, but it doesn't manifest itself 100% of the time. Makes it even more complicated to find the gifted child. What if you have a child that just tunes out in class, doesn't particularly pay attention because they're thinking really interesting thoughts in their head, or they don't do their homework, or they don't listen to the teacher, and teachers will say to me, well, Joan, he can't possibly be gifted. He doesn't do his homework. Well, there you go. That's the number one criteria for he probably is gifted. Well, I shouldn't say that. But highly gifted people are highly selective with what they do, and we're going to see this in a moment. Dr. Renzulli, Joe, talks about defining schoolhouse gifted, and that we need to appreciate the needs of students like Lisa. They are kids who love school, they love learning, they are just gung-ho with anything we can do for them, and we need to make school as engaging and exciting for them as possible. Is the gifted and talented programming that is offered necessarily the thing that's going to engage them? Not necessarily. Might be, but not necessarily. I'm working with a young lady right now, and we're working in a program that's strictly enrichment. There's no grade. Right? She's there because she chooses to be there and for fun. And one of the things that I try to do with these middle schoolers is break them of their schoolhouse giftedness, their good school behaviors. And I'll give you an example. We're reading the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Does anybody know that book? It's, the story of success. It's fascinating. And it's really good evidence for kids of, how smart do you have to be? And I love his answer to that question is smart enough, just smart enough. And how much do you have to invest? 10,000 hours worth of practice. Remember that chapter? Okay. So we're reading the book for fun. I talk to the kids about how to read the book selectively, preview the table of contents, look at how the book is established, make sure we read the foreword together. They were intrigued. And then start a chapter and read like the first page. See how the first section, if you're excited and this is intriguing to you, continue reading in the chapter. If it's not intriguing to you, and these kids are 6th graders, then skip to the end of the chapter and read the conclusion and then start the next chapter. And along the way, take some notes. What's intriguing to you? What's interesting to you? Within the first 24 hours, I got no less than 3 emails from little Vivian. Do we have to take notes? Listen to the language. Do we have to take notes on the foreword and on the flyleaf? Do we have to take notes on every chapter? Now, I think I made it pretty clear, but I knew I would get this question. We're reading it for fun. You're taking notes on what intrigues you and what you would like to have a discussion about when we meet again on Saturday. Vivian was approaching this as a student. How much am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to do this? How am I going to please you, is what she's saying to me as the instructor. And what I'm giving back to her is, Vivian, what's important to you? Read as much of this as you want to read. Take notes on what's interesting to you. This Schoolhouse Gifted is one of the pieces in gifted education that's really difficult for parents and kids and sometimes teachers to understand. Gifted students who show evidence of Schoolhouse gifted behaviors can also be intrinsically motivated. Our ideal student is one who is as creative and quirky and out there as Bart, but has all the learning behaviors and good student behaviors as Lisa. That's like perfect, right? It's a perfect kid. And I can guarantee those are the kids that are going to go super far because, the expression that I use, they know how to play the game. They can figure out how to do school. They know what teachers value. They know what their parents want. They know how to deliver that and then go on and do all the things that are meaningful to them. That's the intrinsic motivation part, okay? To go beyond classroom expectations to interests that are outside of the curriculum, that exhibit a depth of interest and analysis that's not typical of even a high-performing student. In your district, you call these kids the creative producers. The creative producers. They not only are really engaged with learning and out there, but they actually create products that are beyond what maybe teachers ask for or even expect. Creative producers. Okay. So for gifted education, for your own checklist of what you're looking for if your kids are doing gifted education, there should be a rigorous pace. These are the kids that get it really fast. So Lisa is the bright child, and she's going to get it with the first or the second time it's taught, maybe the third time it's taught. Bart may not even need it to be taught the first time. The kid that's sitting in the classroom and the teacher's engaging in the lesson, and they're like, yeah, I get it. And they tune out. And everybody's like, well, they're not engaged with learning. Well, there's nothing to learn, you know? Got it. Let's move on. So they need a rigorous pace, and often that means going beyond what the classroom curriculum is offering, and that's what the REACH program is intended to do, to give them something beyond the classroom, beyond the regular curriculum that can stimulate them. There should be some element of student choice, and we're going to see this when we get to characteristics of gifted, that highly gifted people are not motivated by grades, or often they're not motivated by what their parents want. I know, it's a tough disappointment. And I will say this is a huge caveat. We're working here with second graders, right? And they want nothing more in the world than to make you happy. Let's talk in 5 years when they're teenagers, okay? It's not going to matter to them, but it's going to matter deeply. But even your second grader, even a highly gifted second grader, will reluctantly do what you want them to do as they're just pulled in the direction of what they intrinsically are seeking to do. So there has to be some element of choice in this. And then third, all gifted education should have some meaningful purpose. It has to be authentic. There needs to be an authentic audience or a reason to do it. Lisa will do everything that you ask her to do to get her A. That is highly motivating for her. And I am not denigrating that because I was talking to Cindy tonight. I'm fourth generation teacher in my family. 2 of my 3 children are teachers, and one is an HR specialist, and she does a whole lot of training, so there's a school teacher thing in there too. I have a doctorate in education from Teachers College, Columbia. Nobody does school better than me, you know? And I'm like the classic school kid. But I will tell you that what a gifted kid really wants is not that A. They want something that matters. And where an A means a lot to people who love school and doing school, a gifted kid doesn't even care if you're going to fail this. If you don't do it, well, go ahead and fail me. Very difficult for parents and teachers to deal with. Gifted education should require, and you can again cross-check your REACH program with this because this is what you're going to find, research skills, critical thinking, analytical, and problem-solving skills, communication skills, both communication with a mentor, their teacher, but also communication with their collaborative groups that they work with, and then communication of sharing that product outward to other people. How do they deliver that? I've known in my time some really brilliant people that have never achieved what they should achieve in their careers because they can't communicate it effectively, either by writing or by delivery or even by talking to the folks that they're working with. So the communication piece is key. This screen merely is my bona fides to say there's a lot of research that backs up what's going to follow, okay? So just understand, and there's much more than this. Characteristics of gifted kids. There's a lot of positives. They have an alertness. They're rapid in their reading and their and superior in their language ability. They enjoy learning, analytic ability. They're keen observers, high capacity memory, a very efficient, superior reasoning and problem solving. Thinking that's abstract and complex. They see the big picture of things. They make good connections, lots of attention span, inquisitive and asking questions, intense, highly motivated, strongly empathetic. We don't ever consider that last one, but that's true of highly gifted people. Those all sound really great. But there's a flip side to that. The intensity can be very opinionated, can be short-tempered and impatient with people, having an uneven development. It's been described as a potter's wheel. And if you put clay on a potter's wheel and you arrange it nice and evenly and you spin it, you'll get a nice, symmetrical, beautiful shaped pot. But if that clay is a little off-kilter and you spin the clay, it will be concave and convex and have like odd dimensions to it. Highly gifted people sometimes are highly gifted in some ways and not as highly developed in other ways. And often we see it with social emotional. So you see the really, really bright little 3-year-old who has difficulty sleeping or has a difficulty interacting with his or her peers, or the kid that has tremendous math skills but doesn't really understand sarcasm or doesn't get irony, you know, or the kid that's has an incredible humorous streak but has difficulty writing, you know. So the idea that, and this is one reason that I'm so opposed to the idea of labeling kids as gifted, because as soon as we do that, the world perceives them as being brilliant in everything and good in everything. And that's really problematic. I am a reading specialist, and the beginning of my career, and even to this day, I work with basic skills students as well as gifted students, students that have learning difficulties. And I hated to have those kids labeled because it was like, okay, you're slow in everything. That was not true. When I was a high school teacher, the students that I taught as seniors in high school were in the vocational ed program. These kids went on, many of them, to own their own companies in heating, air conditioning, the girls with hairdressing. If you label, then if you have to list the people that you could not live without in your life. Women, it's your hairdresser. Am I right? Okay. The gal that cuts your hair, right? Or knows how to keep the color you want. Gentlemen, the guy that fixes your car, or women too. Back in the day, we used to pull the engines apart and fix them ourselves. We can't do that anymore, right? Or the tech guy, right? I know many tech people, IT people, who do not have college degrees. Or if they do, it's just a kind of a bare minimum college degree. They did not learn their expertise in college. They're just good at it. They're spatially adept. Think about the people that we value in the world that help us to run the world, right? So you have people that develop at different ages and stages. And I hate the idea of labeling my high school kids as being disabled learners when actually they went out and graduated from high school and tech school, and within 2 years were making more money than I was making as a teacher. And rightfully so, because they were very talented technicians. I don't like labeling gifted kids gifted, because then the presumption is they're going to be gifted in everything. I had a brilliant young man years ago, and his thing was social studies, history. I finally convinced the district that he was just way beyond, and they brought in we were in New Jersey, right down the road here, and they gave him the New York City Regents exam, history exam that they give high school seniors. And he got one wrong, and then he argued that the question was wrong and showed how the question should be rewritten. So they decided that, okay, as a freshman, he could take AP history courses and he could do some advanced work. We're going back years ago. This is a good 25 years ago. And when they then put him in advanced math and advanced science, he went, no, that's cool. I'm okay with the honors course, with the college prep courses, but I don't need AP science, and science isn't my thing. But Stephen, you're so smart. Yeah, in history. He also did ballet, and he's become a professional ballet artist and teacher. And he tells me that when his knees give out, he'll go back and get his PhD and he'll teach history in college. Fascinating guy. He understood himself. This is 25 years ago. He understood himself really well, it was my first exposure to understanding this idea that let's not try to label kids gifted because they're not gifted across the board. Kids that are highly gifted, some of the negative, they are nonconformists. They can be excessive in their criticism of themselves and of others, poor self-image, and that opinionated thing. So what we're going to look at now are characteristics of gifted, and it's done as a word wall. And I will tell you that digital immigrant that I am, I did not create this. This was created by a 25-year-old, okay? But a word wall is, for those of you that are in the know with this, when something is writ large, it can be generalized to a large number of the population. When it's written small, sometimes we see it. So with that in mind, with cognition in characteristics of gifted, we expect that highly gifted people have original and unusual ideas and highly creative, and they connect on seemingly unrelated things. They make interesting connections. They have superior abilities to reason and generalize and problem solve, high intelligence. We would assume that. Sometimes they have a vivid imagination, and sometimes they have an extensive vocabulary, and they're fascinated by words. And I would tell you that if you're identifying kids at K1 or 2, or even age 3 or 4 as gifted, this is what you're identifying, that they're verbal. But you know what? By grade 4, it all kind of levels out. So I have known school districts that have labeled kids in kindergarten as gifted because the kids are superior readers. And then by 4th grade, they can go back to their parents and say, your kid was gifted, but we fixed it, and she's not anymore. Sometimes they learn things rapidly. Sometimes. A lot of that depends on what they want to learn. Sometimes they have an excellent memory and grasp mathematical or scientific ideas quickly. Sometimes, again, depending on what their multiple intelligent dominance is. They can be avid readers. They can have complex and deep thoughts and be abstract. And Often their minds will run on multiple tracks at the same time, being very fast thinkers. That's what we would expect cognitively from bright kids. How about perception and emotion? They're highly sensitive. They're sensitive to others' feelings. They're sensitive to what's going on around them. These are the kids that you don't want watching the news when they're in first and second grade. They pick up on subtleties in the household. You know, you can't spell things anymore. I mean, tone means everything to them. They pick it all up. Sometimes they're highly sensitive to things like clothing and tags on shirts and blue jeans or the feeling of clothes. This is a surprise, but notice how large it's written. They have unusual and excellent senses of humor. And often that's forgotten because often what makes them, what they think is funny is lost on those around them. One of the neatest dissertation projects that I saw at Teachers College, this was in the mid-1990s, was a young woman who worked at a school for gifted preschoolers. Only in New York City can they have, whole preschools for gifted kids. So anyway, she was doing her dissertation on the humor in preschoolers, in gifted preschoolers. And she had file cards where she would write down things that they would laugh at, things that crack them up. And it wasn't things that she thought was funny, but things that kids thought were funny. And she was actually analyzing their humor. They can be very perceptive and very observant. And these are the ones that correct the teacher. Didn't you misspell that word? Intense. Intense is Jim Delisle, a great guru in gifted education, says that intensity is the definition of gifted people. Passionate. They're sensitive to small changes in the environment. They can be introverted. Aware of things that others are not. They perceive the world differently, which becomes awkward for them when the teacher's telling them something and, just makes assumptions, and everybody around them in second grade is understanding it the same way, and they're like, no, I don't see it that way. Tolerance of ambiguity and complexity. Isn't that interesting? We often think of as gifted people as being intolerant and kind of in their own world and on their own plane. But interestingly enough, there is a tendency to want to be sensitive to other people. And they see many sides of things. They consider problems from multiple points of view, having a childlike sense of wonder, open to new experience. And if we do our job well, they're emotionally stable and serene. And that may surprise people most of all, because in the field of gifted education, we get so worried about the at-risk child. Because of the social-emotional, they can be at risk. But notice it's writ small, but it's there. So if we, parents and school teachers, do our job well, these kids can be very stable and really a very positive force in their classroom with others and at home with family. What motivates them and what do they value? Good news, bad news is that they're perfectionists. And perfectionism, writ large, highly generalizable across the whole domain of gifted. Setting high standards for themselves, setting high standards for others, making corrections on their paper and just, rubbing it out to the point that they rip the paper. One of my favorite stories, highly gifted man, Robert Frost, one of America's great poets. He was at college at Harvard. He was taking a course at Harvard. He didn't finish at Harvard, but he was taking a course in poetry. And the professor said, we're all going to free write for 15 minutes. So everybody, and Robert Frost has his head down and he's working, and pondering and working. And the professor comes over and looks over his shoulder and he says, so Bob, how long have you been working on that piece? And Robert Frost looked at him, he said, 6 months. Nobody ever sees my first draft. He was highly a perfectionist. He married a classmate who actually was number 1 in their high school class, and he was number 2. He never really got over that. brilliant woman, and she actually subsumed her life for him, knowing that he could not survive emotionally if she competed with him intellectually. Fragile. He was fragile. That perfectionism is something that those of us who work with in the field of gifted education are very sensitive to and help kids to cope with. You're not going to fix it or change it, but there are ways that kids can learn to cope. They're curious and they have an intense desire to know, which is an intense motivator, very independent and autonomous, less motivated by rewards and praise, not motivated by grades, right? These are the kids that drive you crazy because you're saying, but you can't, you have to do well in this class because it's going to count for your GPA. And the kid's like, who cares? That's when they're in high school and you want them to get to college and you're like, oh my gosh. So helping kids to learn to play the school game. Anyone that works with gifted kids understands these characteristics of gifted and helps them to understand, yep, it matters. You might not want to do it, but no, it's something that's required. And it will get you to your ultimate goals. So they're driven by their own motivation. They're seekers of ultimate truths, and they look for patterns in life. They enjoy challenges. They like to take risks. As someone who's worked with teenagers for most of my career, I wanted to set out intellectual challenges for my preteen and teenagers, because if they're not intellectually challenged, they will find other challenges because they're teenagers, and frankly, their brains are wired to go after that dopamine fix when they take a risk and, it's rewarded, and it's a wonderful, exhilarating feeling. So I don't want them shoplifting or taking drugs or doing bad things. So to give them intellectual challenges and giving them intellectual risks to take that will give them that adrenaline and that kick is healthy for them and productive. This is one reason that I think that competitions are good for gifted kids. It's not the competition and winning that's what's important, and it's actually not important to the gifted mind, but it's the testing myself against others. I know how good I am in my class. I know how good I am in my school. How good am I with kids from other schools, other states? How good am I in the world? So Cindy mentioned that I'm involved with National History Day, which is a national competition. We're actually now international. 600,000 kids from literally all over the world participate in some way in National History Day research every year. I'm also involved in the New Jersey Future Problem Solving program, which has an international component to it. And over the years, watching kids participate in these extraordinary challenges against others and seeing how they respond as they move through regional competition and state competition and the national competition. It's not about the reward of winning an honor, but I really am that good. Oh, gosh, I really did have something important to say or to contribute. It's important for them. These are kids that get morally outraged at injustice. They want to remove Woodrow Wilson's name from Princeton University. Black Lives Matter. Why is it that we have college students almost in every generation that find a cause that they rally around? You've got bright kids that are all together that find their voice in things that value and matter to them. They sometimes can be overwhelmed by their range of interests. And one of the things that a gifted program will do is help kids to focus and to find their focus. And it's not that they have to make choices forever, but for right now, between this, and this, which one do you want to zero in and concentrate on? And then, next year or next semester, we can concentrate on this. We all do this. It's called your major when you get to college, right? Or your career. We try not to narrow kids down too quickly, but to help them to understand that if they're going to be able to go deep, they have to, at some point, focus. They have strong moral convictions, integrity, honesty, often have high drive, often are visionaries, see the big picture. They love to discuss. They are sincere with what they're doing. And again, if we do our jobs well, parents and teachers, they are very accepting of themselves and of others. They have that empathy. What about their activity level? A lot of energy, a lot of energy. If you had a child that you know is pretty bright, and you look back at their sleeping patterns when they were a baby, and they weren't cranky, but they just didn't sleep very much, you know? The naps that should have been 2 hours were about an hour, or the hour nap was 17 minutes, you know? And you were lucky if that happened. A lot of physical energy, but a lot of intellectual energy, a lot of stuff going on at the same time. This surprises teachers. This does not surprise you as parents, that gifted people have a long attention span and sustained concentration. And the reason that we don't see it in school is because we don't allow it to emerge. School is all about a bell schedule, right? And now we are doing language arts. Okay, put your books away and we're now going to do math. Okay, put your books away and now we're going to go to special. It is just the nature of the way schools are oriented. At home on a Saturday, when they're up in their room and they're puttering with what they want to do, and you call them to lunch at 11, okay, and then you call them again at 11:30 and at 12, and about 1:30 they finally come down, and okay. But they were so engrossed in what they were doing that they didn't want to leave it. And I'm not talking video games, okay? I'm talking about a book that they're reading, or a piece of art they're creating, or something that they're researching, or an experiment or a model they're putting together or taking apart, right? That long attention span that can be sustained is a hallmark of gifted people. They can't stop thinking, and they work themselves to exhaustion. They need periods of contemplation and solitude. Again, parents, you understand this. We don't see it as much at school because we don't really allow it at school. I used to say to my middle schoolers, just for fun, go into the cafeteria and sit with a book at a table by yourself and see how long, just count seconds, how long it takes to have 3 adults. Are you okay? Do you feel all right? Do you need to see the nurse? Do you have friends? Are you new to the school? I can hook you up with somebody. No, I just want to sit here and finish my book. No, unacceptable social behavior for middle schoolers. So, kids who have learned to play the school game, and they all do, learn how they're to sit together, and they play on recess, and they do all this social stuff, and they come home and they are physically, emotionally, mentally exhausted. And what do you get? You get the shell of the kid. I'll talk to you later as they go to their room, or the little second grader that needs to have a nap, you know, before they can really engage. They have worn themselves out. They need those periods of contemplation and solitude, and that's okay. That's a good thing. And they can be spontaneous. Again, if we frame their world in such a way that they can take creative and intellectual risks, you'll see spontaneity. What about social relations? Well, this is the tough one, because this is Bart who asks inappropriate questions at inappropriate times. And the most inappropriate question often is why. I tell the story of my daughter-in-law, Kate. She's a physician. She is a geriatrics professional. Thank you very much. Kate told me when she went into this field, I said, oh, Kate, this is wonderful. She said, Joan, I love you dearly, but I can't be your primary care physician. I said, you can be my second. She said, oh, yes, I can do that. And John and I do not make any medical decisions without calling Kate and conferring with Kate first. She's brilliant and darling and wonderful. Well, Kate, Roman Catholic, got thrown out of CCD at age 6. She was in Georgia, imagine in Atlanta, Georgia, for asking why. Now, those of you who are not Catholic, there is a concept in the Catholic Church called transubstantiation, where the bread and the wine is turned into the body and blood of Christ. It is a central tenet of the Catholic Church. And Kate, at 6 years old, who had a scientific and logical mind, went, That doesn't seem exactly plausible to me, which is like blasphemy. And her parents were called in and they said, you have to remove Catherine from CCD because she asked inappropriate questions. Poor Kate. I would like to say she is back to being a practicing Catholic. Thank you very much. I'm not sure she's ever reconciled the science of it, but she can just take it on faith, I guess. Asking embarrassing questions, asking inappropriate questions, feeling different and out of step. This becomes more and more problematic the older kids get. I'll tell you when I started to really see the manifestation of this is in third graders moving into fourth and fourth graders and moving into fifth. Kids that were old enough to start to recognize that they got things faster than the other kids in the class. They understood the answers that the other kids were asking and just didn't get. They were asking questions that nobody was asking. They thought things were funny that like nobody else got the joke. They get on the bus and say, did you see the President's State of the Union last night? And they're like, what? What is that? And so they start to feel a little different than those around them. If that is not addressed appropriately, it causes some real emotional distress, which is, again, why we have things like the REACH program. It really is for a large part, and I think Cindy agrees with this, for the social emotional needs of these kids. It's not about we want you to feel good about yourself as a student, because they can feel good about themselves as a student in the classroom. They get A's, they do well, they're celebrated, they get, they win the spelling bee, all of that good stuff. But where do they get to interact with kids who are like them, like-minded peers? A couple of hours a week in a REACH program. And Cindy apologized. It's only a couple hours a week. But for a gifted kid to have that time in school and realize, wow, there are other people like me that get my jokes, that are interested in things that I'm interested in, that want to do a research project, not because there's a grade, just because it's something I'm really interested in, I want to do, that's huge. And that's a big part of what gifted programs should be about, is allowing kids that time with like-minded peers. It encourages them to be compassionate, and it gives them empathy not only for others, but in their classroom. They understand themselves well, and then they understand others. I'll tell you another anecdote of Daphne, who was just a brilliant young woman. And Daphne in 7th grade was in a language arts class where she had been really not placed well, but it was back in the day when we'll just put all kinds of kids in the same class together, and the poor teacher has like 5 different levels to differentiate for. Doesn't happen. So Daphne, who was far and above anyone in 7th grade, by the way, Daphne went on to Duke University on a full scholarship, 4-year scholarship. They paid for everything, including her books, and they gave her an annual stipend. Duke University paid Daphne to go to Duke. And she was really happy to do it because they had a really cool research program that she wanted to go to. Anyway, this kid was brilliant. She entertained herself or kept herself intellectually stimulated by analyzing the learning styles of the other kids in the class. This is the empathy thing. And figuring out that Charlie was a verbal learner. And he needed to hear, like auditory, he needed to hear things. And the teacher was giving him everything with directions. So she would slide up next to Charlie and read him the directions. Oh, and he was cool and good to go. And then she recognized that another kid needed stuff to manipulate. So she would create these little models or manipulatives for the kid to figure things out. And she did this the entire year, and the teacher never had a clue that it was going on. But Daphne just was having a grand time, and with her empathy, her deep empathy for the other kids in the class, and felt that she was doing something that was productive. Now, having heard this, cognitive, social, emotional, what the kids value, what motivates them, their energy levels, This is created by Dr. Roger Taylor, a list of what screens kids out of many, fortunately not here, but many gifted programs. And if you look at this, what you're seeing is exactly what we've just seen are characteristics of gifted kids. They're bored with routine tasks, and they tend to act out. They refuse to do rote homework. They're impatient with failures, perfectionism. They disagree vocally with others. They make jokes or puns at inappropriate times. Emotionally sensitive, they might overreact. Refuse to accept authority. They want something, they're that autonomy thing. They tend to dominate others. We talk about in education now the competencies, and I think you probably have a component of this in Hillsborough, but this is something interesting to Google, but look for P21, or Partnership for 21st Century Skills. But adults that are sitting out here, if you look at this, you're recognizing what you value in the workplace with the people you work with. And indeed, this didn't come from the Department of Education. It didn't come from the Federal Department of Education. It came from the real world, where people in business and entrepreneurs were saying, you know, the biggest problem we have today are we hire the best and the brightest kids from the best universities, and they can't perform. They wait to be told what to do. They wait to be told how to do it. They go off and follow the directions very clearly, and then they come back and they wait for praise. They're doing school. They're doing exactly the way they have been taught to perform. So this is radically changing now as the whole world is recognizing the need for kids to be self-directed, for them to be able to discern bias and understand the research that they read, to find their own answers, to be able to effectively communicate and collaborate with others. Okay. So the goals of your Hillsborough program are to develop these kind of skills, to enhance what kids bring to us. Remember that the definition of gifted is the potential, the performing, or the potential to perform. So the district attempts to find the kids that have the potential, high potential, and then to work with them to develop the problem solving, the abstract thinking that they are already predisposed to do, but to give them the skills and strategies to do this with the intent to increase their independence, their individuality, their self-direction. The REACH program meets the needs of special needs, interests, and abilities of identified students in these ways. And I think that you can pick this up online. This is in all of the literature, and you can see that it all relates back to feeding the needs of the characteristics of gifted. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn over the COGAT piece to Mrs. Sini.
So like Dr. Rudiman said, we're looking for potential. So there are a variety of educational instruments that are used out there, both through the state and through the country to identify for gifted programs. One of the important mechanisms we use here is the COGAT test, because it is a test for ability, because the researchers behind that test have created national norms to help us compare students, and also because they've put effort into making that test as culturally unbiased as possible. There are no perfect standardized tests out there. I wish that there were, because it would make my job so much easier. But the COGAT is a very important tool, and we've monitored the scores of students over years to be certain that that's what we feel is the best tool to help us compare students in Hillsborough. Just for your context, students in Hillsborough tend to do very well on the COGAT, and one of the more helpful measures when you receive COGAT scores back from me, which should be by email in the spring. So one of the more useful things to look at is the local percentile rank, which will tell you how your child compares to all the students in Hillsborough rather than all the students nationally. It's great if your child is doing well across the nation, but we have approximately 10% of our students here who are at the 97th percentile or above. So you should feel really good that your child is going to school with lots of children who are doing very well in cognitive ability compared to all students across the nation. It's really remarkable. So there are 3 parts to the COGAT, by the way, and you'll get all of that information in the score report. You'll be able to see results for your child's verbal, quantitative, so think literacy, think math, and nonverbal, which is more of your visual spatial. And another reason why we use the COGAT with second grade students is it's not a reading and writing test like most of the tests that you take, because students have different levels of literacy. At the early elementary level, it's a very visual test. So, if you're concerned about your child's reading in the COGAT, it really is appropriate for second graders, and it really is designed to try to get at their ability, not just their literacy and their verbal skills. As far as preparing your child for the COGAT, we really do urge you to keep a regular routine, do everything that you do on a normal school day where you're trying to prepare your child to have a great day at school. And the most important thing is to tell your child that this is a test about how they learn and think. And it is really important because we know that depending on what we tell children about tests, it can affect how they feel and also how they achieve on those tests. So I urge you to keep the regular routine, and also don't do anything that would make a child feel more stress about this test. We know that stress inhibits cognitive function, and again, we want all children to be able to show their potential through this assessment. So the more we make it business as usual, the better it will be for the children, and the more accurate idea it will give us of their ability. It's going to be the week of January 25th. If for some reason you're out of the country that week, there will be a makeup week. So if you have any scheduling concerns, the best person to reach out to would be the building reach teacher, so that they're aware of any possible conflicts. And I will be emailing you results. I tried that for the first time this fall, and I think it worked out really nicely. In the past, when I had sent out reports generated by the testing company, I had a lot of parent phone calls that were just asking, hey, can you explain why it says LPR? What does that mean? Instead, you'll get an email from me that explains this score means local percentile rank. It means how your child compared to other children in Hillsborough. If they're a local percentile rank of a 70, that means they did better than 70% of children in Hillsborough. So I've made every effort I can to try and make this something easy for you to understand and for you and the teacher to be able to use to best help your child. So we use the results of the COGAT for a lot of purposes in the district, not just for the REACH program. So that's also important for you to know, that it can be useful for just learning more about your child in general. As far as the next step in the process, for children that show they may have exceptional needs on the COGAT, we do a test of skills and achievement. Again, because the REACH program does pull out of their classroom, we want to see what their achievement level is. So this is more similar to the types of questions you would see on the PARCC test or other standardized tests trying to measure what we actually teach in school. The COGAT's trying to measure just potential, like Dr. Runneman said is so important, whereas the achievement test is measuring more of what we expect the child to be learning by second grade. And all of the tests that we use are normed nationally, which basically means the researchers took a whole big sample and they made sure that if you gave the kid the same test another day, they'd get a similar score, and that students we see those characteristics in get similar scores. So there's the cognitive abilities test, there's the achievement test, and also a creativity assessment. And for all of those, we just do ask that you keep the routine as normal. And we're also going to be using just some basic tools to get informal feedback from parents and teachers if we think that there's a child that has exceptional need. So we have used a variety of tools in the past, and we've tried to find the tool that is best to give us what we need to know. So we do rely on you as partners if there is something you want us to know about your child to get in touch and do let us know that. Our goal, again, like I've said, and as is required by board policy, is to figure out which children need the program and really require something else in order to achieve their highest potential. As far as our gifted education specialists, 3 of them took time out of their evening tonight. Alyssa Green from Woods Road, Tina Mandracia from Amsterdam, and Suzanne Wisnowski from Sunnymead, just so you could have a name and a face, and they were here introducing you, so they're in the back right there. And unable to be present, but still great resources for you, are Maureen Donofsky at HES. Right now, Barbara Parker is filling in for her, but Ms. Donofsky will be back in the spring. There's also Amy Casal at Triangle and Pam Peterson at Woodfern. So if you do have questions about the testing at your school or anything to do with the REACH program, they're a great first point of contact. That's my contact information, which you can also find on the REACH website. And at this point of the evening, both Dr. Rudham and I are available to answer your questions. Just so you know, I'll repeat your questions so the whole audience can hear, and also it can be captured on tape. So if anyone has any questions, we would be happy to answer.
You had a question earlier on.
So there's a couple questions going on here, but I think the basic boils down to nature versus nurture. Are students born to be in the gifted program, or are there things that parents either can do when the children are young or can do over time to help them qualify for a program like the REACH program?
It's a great question. And one, yes, they are born with a high cognitive ability. Just born to it, God-given, universe-given. Can you enhance that? Absolutely. And the reason why you have such a high percentage of high-functioning, high-performing kids in Hillsborough is because of your social demographic, right? You're a township that values education. Many of you have moved here because of the education. You value educational experiences for your kids, so you provide a lot of extracurricular activities for the students. You vote for the school budget, right? So you make sure you get good teachers and you pay them well and all of that. So yeah, that makes a difference. Can you make a child gifted? You can make a child a high achiever. Yes, absolutely. And are many of our high-achieving, extraordinary people in society naturally geniuses? Or did they have some extraordinary opportunities along the way? Probably opportunities. All right. So, and the other question was, if my child misses it, can they get in at any other point? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, it's a rolling admissions policy here, you know. That's another reason I just abhor these school districts that label kids, and you're in and you're out, and by golly, we've identified that you're not smart in second grade. So you know what? You're never going to be smart. And I have kids who are in high school and college who I've encountered at like National History Day and International Future Problem Solving that have said to me, well, you know, I'm not really very smart. I work really hard. How do you know you're not smart? Well, I was told that when I was in second grade. I didn't get into the gifted program. I'm like, don't worry about that. It's like, but sometimes it's too late, you know? Their self-image has been formed. So we don't want to do that here. Right? You don't want to do it as parents with your kids by saying, oh, if you don't get into the REACH program, you know, you're never going to get in the college of your choice. Not true. Just go out and look at the bulletin board out there and all those extraordinary people that did not go through a gifted program.
A few questions. Like, suppose if a child is really, you know, into one subject, like math, do you actually do math in REACH or not necessarily?
Okay, so the question is, and then Mrs. Sini is going to answer this. If a child is highly developed and has a passion in a subject like math, is the REACH program specific to program?
That is a great question. And I do, before I forget, want to add a little bit to the idea of what can parents do to help their children, because I think it's a really important question. I think it's probably why all of you came out here tonight, at the very base level. So the advice that I always give is to really follow the child's interest and passion. So as a teacher, I would often tutor students, and often the parent picked the area of quote-unquote deficiency to have a tutor work with the child. And man, was that painful after a full day of school to sit and do writing with kids who hated to write. So really, as much as you can make learning experiences authentic to your kids, that's what's going to make them want to commit to those tasks and be creative and learn about that subject. So if your kid's interested in science and you find a kit to help them do experiments, or you go to the library and you guys find a book together about experiments you can do in the bathtub, that's great, because that's following their interests and it's validating what they want to learn about. And I think that is honestly the best thing you can do to help. So about what the program looks like in a little more detail, I think that's a great question. So the program generally is designed around what the teachers refer to as REACH thinking skills, and they really cut across all the different disciplines. So something like originality and fluency and creative thinking and elaboration, you can do that in math, and you can do that in literacy or social studies, science, art, any of the subjects. So what we've tried to do when we wrote the curriculum is to offer pathways for students within the units based on their interests. So for example, they might learn about mysteries, and they could pick a mystery that has to do with numbers, or they could pick a mystery that has to do with a story that never got finished if they're interested in writing. Both at third grade and fourth grade, we're asking the students to work on a passion project. So the last unit of the year is students picking something that they're interested in and going through the process of inquiry with the REACH teacher as a mentor. So while we don't have a specific REACH math or REACH literacy, we try to create an environment where the needs of all the students are being met through the open-ended units. Sure.
So the first thing you go by is the test. I mean, you have to get a certain score in the test before anything else.
Yes, but again,
First, right? A kid can't get a lower score, but the teacher really thinks they should be doing it.
so we're going to take feedback from the teachers into consideration. I haven't run across a student who the teacher said this is one of the most exceptional students we've ever taught, but they scored really poorly on the COGAT. That
Teacher might think, well, despite the score, this kid is
we're working on making sure that our system doesn't let that happen. So that's one of the reasons why we're using the COGAT and the Iowa and the Torrance, because they're measures that fairly compare all children. So we do take the teacher's input into account, but the way I view it is more so that we don't have any child not qualify who we think should qualify, not vice versa. So I'm not sure if I repeated that question, but the question was basically whether a teacher who didn't think the child was gifted could preclude the child from participating in the program, and our identification processes ensure that that is highly unlikely to happen. Are you done with your questions? Do you have another one? Okay, if you remember, let us know.
Basically, what I'm gathering for the whole thing is the only thing that I have in my head is that are we dealing more with personality traits as opposed to academic achievement, or is that a combination of both that we're looking for?
So I'll start here, and then I'll let Dr. Runeman fill in. The question was basically, is this about academic ability and cognitive ability, or is this about personality traits? Both anecdotally in the highly gifted people I know and in the research, we see that the two go together, that when you have exceptional people like Einstein, they walk around with their hair in a million different directions. Social conventions don't seem to matter. Many times when we see exceptionality, it's exceptionality in a variety of areas. There's the exceptional ability, but also some of those quirky personality traits that Dr. Runeman discussed.
Right. The COGAT is a cognitive abilities test. So we start with the basic, and it goes back to your question, the basic innate, their academic, their intellectual ability, their cognitive ability, okay? What springs from that are behaviors that sometimes we can recognize, which this mom is concerned is going to screen her kid out because he's like really kind of quirky, which screened Einstein out of programs, right? Or in a case where the kid has strong school behaviors, that they can be perceived as schoolhouse gifted, and the COGAT test will indicate that there's a whole lot going on, intellectual ability. So we start with the intellectual ability, right? But it manifests itself in behaviors as well. Okay. We pay attention to the behaviors and the social emotional because we want to protect the kids. I have always seen my job, and I think that this is the answer to your question too, that people and the great teachers that are sitting in the back, our job is really advocacy. Advocacy for the child, and to be a voice and a support and a mentor for the child, for what their needs are. Right? So when kids walked into my room and they were there for the gifted program, I wasn't there to fix them. I wasn't there to remediate what they weren't good at. I just leave that at the door. Let's pay attention to what you really love, and let's dig down deeper. When they went back into their classroom, I made it very clear to them, you've got to play the school game. The things that you don't like to do, you still have to do, and you have to do it to the best of your ability. That's your job as a student. So it goes together, but we start with the intellectual, their cognitive ability.
The question is how many students are in the program in each school, and it varies by school, by year. So there's not, but I will tell you that the National Association of Gifted Children estimates that between 5 and 10% of the population is gifted. But again, we're comparing some very high-level students to each other to see who requires the modification here in our context. So there's not a cap that I get to that I say, okay, we have enough students. We look across the criteria, and we're looking for exceptional creativity, exceptional ability, and as much as we can measure how committed they are to really passionate learning.
Closer to the 10% range.
Yes. But again, there's no quota, so it's really looking at what children have exceptional needs. And the overall level of education that happens in Hillsborough is very high in our classrooms every day. So that's a great thing, but we're really looking for the kids for whom the teacher finds it really challenging to make sure that they are always working to their potential. And trying to identify those kids, both for their sake and the sake of the entire class.
I'd just like to say, as frustrating as that answer might be, that it's so nebulous, that there's not a precise, what if you were in a situation where there were 25 seats in the gifted class, and every year they filled 25 seats? No more, no less. I have to tell you, that would make me really nervous, right? So it is not something, it's widely variable. So that for Mrs. Sini to be aware of, 2% of the population is highly gifted. That's like genius range. Gifted is the 5 to 10%, right? We know that Hillsborough is going to be on the high end because of your social demographics here and socioeconomic demographics as well. So it's variable, but I just want you to know that's actually a much more comforting answer than we're only taking 25 kids, regardless.
So within the field, so for anyone who might not have been able to hear, the comment was about the whole idea of genius level, and what we tend to refer to that in the field is profoundly gifted. And so, like Dr. Rudman said, about 2% of the population is really profoundly gifted, meaning whatever test I give them, they're going to be at the 99th percentile. And we do have those children, but they're not very common compared to the more broad range that the program does serve. Oh, let's go to someone who hasn't gotten their question yet. Go ahead.
I understood that you have 3 sections in COGAT, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's verbal, there's quantitative, and non-verbal. Is there a cutoff in each section that a child has to be in the 90% percentile and above in all 3, or is it a combination? And that's my first question. And the second question is it a rubric where the child is assessed in tasks? Does that have a weightage, and how the child does in all the tests, the grade level? And is it a combination that you take the COGAT scores, you take the child's performance, and what is the weightage in each?
Okay, so the question was about the nitty-gritty of the identification process and what the rubric looks like, and whether the child has to achieve a certain score on every section of the COGAT. And like Dr. Rudman said, students have different abilities in different areas. So there is not one cutoff score on the COGAT. We used to only use the composite score, which basically means the overall intellectual ability score. We don't do that anymore because we are really going according to the theory that there could be a child who's really gifted in quantitative ability. So we want to make sure that the program is accessible to that child as well. So there is not one cutoff score for every single criteria. So there's not one make or break. If they just had one more point on this one test, they would have been into the program. So to qualify for further screening, because again, we have a large district, it would be time and cost prohibitive for us to give all these tests to all of these second graders. Even at the state level, we've had conversations about over-testing of children. So I see some heads nodding around the room. We don't want to give every child so many tests. We want to be respectful of their learning time with their teacher. So we do the COGAT, again, because we use it for a variety of things in the district. And on the COGAT, if they score in the 90th percentile or above in any of the areas, 93rd in any of the areas or 90th overall, then they go for further screening. And then once we get into the further screening, we look at those 3 scores, the COGAT being weighted the most heavily, and then the achievement test and the creativity assessment with less weight. But again, we're looking for those outliers who are at the 95th, 96th, 97th to 99th percentile on those other assessments. And again, we don't want one assessment to be the make or break measure. And we are relying on the teacher and parent informal feedback. We used to quantify those, but what we found is parents would call and say, well, I had no idea this little survey you sent me in the mail was being calculated and put into a matrix for my child. And, I thought, well, that really isn't the best thing to do. I'd rather just hear, is there something exceptional you see about your child? And the same with teachers. We would have teachers fill out forms about children. And then what would happen is the child wouldn't qualify for the program. And I would say to the teacher, well, you scored them lower than average compared to their peers. And the teacher would go, but they should be in the program. So we wanted to make everything as transparent as possible. And every year I'm working to make the identification system as fair as possible and work as well as possible for both the teachers and the students. So we're constantly refining in collaboration with other school districts around the state, talking about what they're doing and making sure that we're following national best practices. So I do read the norm manuals of different standardized tests and make sure that we're using the best methods to identify students. So the COGAT is weighted more heavily in the process because it is a measure of that potential and not just the achievement. So hopefully that answers your questions there. I saw another few hands. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It is.
Okay, so first question was whether the COGAT is mandatory. I will just say that if we heard a concern from a parent, we deal with that on a case-by-case basis, but it would be helpful for us and for you, for your child to take the test. I can show you a copy of what kind of results you would get. So it can also be used by our child study team, it's used by the classroom teacher, and it can be used by you because you'll get a report that looks like your child, for example, your child is higher in verbal ability. So when you're explaining quantitative problems to your child, if you do so using words, they will be more likely to understand. Or the other way, your child is higher in nonverbal. So when you're doing math problems with your child, to show pictures would be a better way to help build your child's quantitative reasoning ability. So it really is designed to be useful. So I think that answered the second question, which was what else might it be used for? Even in terms of the classroom teacher, they may look at the COGAT results and think, well, I've had, some observations that this one child is struggling in this area. This is a way that I might be able to leverage their strengths to assist them. And then the third comment was about whether the test is fair across socioeconomic levels. As far as my knowledge, it is the best option to use, but I will be honest and say it is not perfect, and that we see a pattern in standardized tests of a socioeconomic effect. So that is something that we're closely monitoring in the district, and I do go through the test results with our demographic data because I have every commitment to making sure that we're equitably identifying students from all demographic groups, both racial and socioeconomic, within the district. So that is something that is a personal passion of mine, and I really care about making sure that there's equity in our program.
Also, English is a second language because it's not a verbal test.
Yes. So since Dr. Rudiman wasn't by the microphone, I will just repeat that the test, because it's nonverbal, is also one of the better assessments to use with English language learners, as is our creativity assessment as a nonverbal creativity assessment.
So if the score of the child on COGAT is, let's say, borderline, but the teacher knows, but would it depend on the teacher's recommendation of what the activities or his attitude or whatever in class behavior and things academics is, would it help for the child to get into reach, or that would be that result of COGAT will be the only criteria, first thing for him or her to pass?
So the question was about for kids on the borderline. So to explain that, about 20% of students are in the testing pool for the COGAT. So if the child's COGAT score is not in the 90s, that puts them really a decent distance from the top performers in the district. So those children will not be in the testing pool. Then in the testing pool, that's when we'll rely on teacher input for students who are at the borderline of qualifying to say, is this a child where every day you're thinking that you need to be giving them more? That's the type of child we want to make sure is in the program. So again, we're trying to use teachers as a extra boost if a child should need it, but not as something that would disqualify a child from participating.
So another question. Usually it's seen that a gifted child will be more verbal or quirky in his behavior. Is it also the other way around?
Mm-hmm.
That a child is much quieter, he or she is very like in a school environment doing the right things, yet might be considered gifted.
So the question was,
Other one is not,
Yes, the introvert.
taking attention
Yeah.
to
Yes.
itself.
so the question was basically, can more introverted children or children who aren't behavior problems be gifted? the answer is absolutely. But one of the points that we try to make tonight is that what you may see in your mind as the ideal student is not always gifted. So we want parents to be aware that children with gifts and talents come in all different shapes and sizes. So I think everyone probably got that message by now.
Sometimes as a parent, I would think that, or I don't know if it's my notion, but teachers tend to think, okay, he is a little out of the box, that's why he's more apt to be in that category. And this child is not so much out of the box, like behavior wise, so may not be.
And that is, so the comment was about children, who may do everything that they're asked to do in the classroom and not necessarily demonstrate any extraordinary creativity, for example. And that's why we do the universal screening, meaning we test every kid so we can try and find anything that we're not seeing because a child might be more quiet or introverted.
There's a lot of research on the introverted gifted personality, and often they're not picked up in school because they just don't care for anybody to know what they're thinking. The whole definition of an extrovert literally needs to go out in the world and play off the world with their ideas. That's the way they process information and process their environment. An introvert brings everything in, and literally it's within. And they don't have a great need to share. So they're not the kid in the class that's going to raise their hand, And it doesn't mean that they're not thinking or they're not actively engaged. It means that they just don't choose to share it out. Teachers are aware of this. And often teachers will, again, testing is a help here because it gives us a quantitative understanding of how they're thinking. But teachers in the classroom are aware of the introverted personality and ways to find out what they're doing and what they're thinking. So I never asked kids I never called on kids that didn't raise their hand. I felt that it was disrespectful for the introvert. But there were a lot of private sidebar conversations as I'd walk by the desk, So, Pernille, what are you thinking about that? And can you give us can you give me an idea what your thoughts are? In a very quiet, unassuming way. So there are ways to get at that. So no, I think that in a district like this with the range and scope of identification, that a kid would not be lost because they're introverted.
So the question was about students who struggle in some areas, like, for example, spelling, but maybe really strong in other areas. So our district has a whole wide range of supports for students who are struggling. And again, because the test is not paper and pencil in terms of writing things down, spelling would not even be a tiny, teeny part of it. So especially at the second grade level, the test is oral. It's read to the student, and then they select from pictures in all the sections. So there's nothing, they won't even see words on the test. It is important to note that we do have a number of twice exceptional students in our district, which means students who are classified to receive special education services because of certain areas of struggle, but they also have exceptional talents in other areas. So we do look at students who have individualized education plans as a group to see how they're represented in the overall population of students receiving gifted and talented services. So that is something we monitor as well. And again, we do have a number of students who participate in both programs.
The concept of the twice exceptional is a very enlightened view of gifted, and it's wonderful that you have that here in Hillsborough. That's been an ongoing fight in the last probably 20 years in the field of education to help educators mainstream educators largely to understand that someone can struggle in one area and be highly gifted in another. And again, I just ask you to look at that wonderful bulletin board display, and you will see twice exceptional learners in there.
I would like to make a comment. Thank you for providing a lot of the information, your time, and excellent, slides and everything. But it goes back, sorry, to identification of the gifted kids in terms of labeling as the Einstein. However, I do feel like the Michelangelos and other areas that I think they're genius, or it could be other exceptional Mozart, for example. How is that then? Will you be able to find that gifted kid through this test?
That's a great
So
question. Multiple intelligence
So
theory.
not for a quantitative math, and I'm pro math, by the way. But, but there's some other areas of geniuses that we should, or I think it should also be helpful for us as a parent to push forward.
So the question was basically, how can we identify giftedness or genius in a whole wide variety of areas, including art and music? Dr. Rudiman?
This speaks to the field of multiple intelligence theory, Howard Gardner, and I am right on the same page with you. One of the reasons that the IQ test is really not helpful, because how does an IQ test find musical genius or a Lady Gaga, for example, although actually she has an IQ of about 160. But the geniuses of the world in other fields, spatial domains, building, art, dance, music, kinesthetic, the sports, the gifted athletes. And you're right, that is difficult to find through a cognitive abilities test. What we are able to do in public school is, particularly in a place like Hillsborough, where there's a wide range of opportunity in music and art and performing arts, and you think about your middle school and your high school and all that, and kids start to manifest their talents and they start to be developed. That is also, I challenge parents, what you will see at home. And public schools can only go so far. So it really is a partnership. So if you see a child that has a real passion for music, or a passion for theater, or a passion for art, and you support that at home. And that there's ways for that to come out in school as well. With Mrs. Sini spoke about the passion project, or the inquiry study that the 3rd and 4th graders do, that they can communicate through the medium that speaks strongly to them. They can sing it, they can dance it, they can act it, they can draw it, So that's multiple intelligence theory. If you're interested in this, look for Howard Gardner, Gardner, Howard Gardner. He's still at Harvard. He's now well into his 70s. And multiple intelligence theory, and it is fascinating. It's one of the things that I rely on strongly as a gifted and talented specialist, because for almost 3/4 of the 20th century, from the 19th century, we identified gifted with a number, an IQ score. So the question was always, how smart are you, as in what's your number? And Howard Gardner reframed that question with, how are you smart? In what ways are you smart? So I will say, too, that a child that is an avid musician or artist, and they might be in the REACH program, the kind of elements that are in that program, where they're helping them to be researchers, to be problem solvers, to be self-directed, the competencies, and then all the autonomy, will help them in their chosen field of talent.
And I just want to add that I do think it's a challenge to identify students across, especially the arts, through a standardized test. I've had parents reach out to me and say, my child has a real talent for theater, and, she's a 2nd grader. So I put that parent in touch with the high school theater director and said, here, if you have any child parts in your play, you may want to consider this child. Well, the child went on to star in a Broadway play last year, but I'm happy to do whatever I can in partnership with parents to connect you to resources across the disciplines, as is the rest of the supervisory team. So if there is anyone who is still here who's thinking, I might have the next Mozart, get in touch, and we're happy to share whatever suggestions we have within each field to help you enrich your child and to make sure that they're taking advantage of anything the district can offer that will also help enrich them. So the first question was whether you'll only get a report if your child is selected for the gifted program, and that is not the case. Everyone will get a report with the COGAT test score results because that will help you understand how your child learns. That's a good question. So can you see a sample of the report? Over the next couple days, I will put on the website a redacted copy so people can see what it would look like, just so you have an idea if you're contemplating whether you want your child to participate in the test or not, what results you would get back.
I was just wondering, with how you said the test is administered, if your child isn't really an auditory learner, is that going to affect them? Because usually they aren't tested by a teacher talking to them.
So the question was, if your child's not an auditory learner, will that negatively affect them on the test? I would hope not, because the way the test makers construct the test is to test the children with that test and then test them with a whole bunch of other tests to make sure that all the tests are saying the same thing. But again, it's designed to try to give second graders the best chance at showing their ability. So it's not perfect. And if your child doesn't like to hear things, then that could be a challenge.
He gets has trouble listening and follow directions, but he's I see the
Yeah, so
has a lot of ability.
we do trust. So the comment was, what about children who might not pay attention to the test? So I do give a memo to all the teachers to make sure that as they're doing the practice questions, each section has, a couple practice questions that the teacher goes through with the child so they understand what that particular section is asking. And we do ask them to circulate the room, make sure that the children are filling in and that the children understand what that section is expecting before they move on to the part of the test that counts. So there are mechanisms in place, and I do in my memo ask the teachers to make sure that the children understand and that they are actually completing it as they circulate the classroom. So we're doing everything we can to make it the best testing environment.
Just giving the direction for how to complete a section, or are they literally?
No, it's question by question. So again, one of the other questions that I sometimes get asked is there a time limit for the test? If my child works more slowly than another child, is that going to be a problem? And this is not your SAT. This is 7-year-olds. So, it's really low key. The teacher doesn't make a big deal out of it. They try and make sure all the kids know what to do. I mean, this is the first time the kids are filling in a little bubble for their answer. So the teachers take the time, they walk around, they make sure everybody's, happy and calm and do their little class cheers and make it an appropriate environment for second graders to do their best. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, what you teach in the program, what are the roles of the program, whether you teach more skills they lack or enhance the skills they have. Many things they lack those skills.
So you may have heard the question more clearly than I did, so do you want to repeat it?
I believe I hear you asking, so in the time that they have in the REACH program, how does that enhance what they're doing? Does it enhance their skills or teach them what they lack? It enhances their skills. They walk into that room and teachers should not be concerned at what they don't do well. It should all be about what they are doing well, and let's go deeper with it. That being said, the time in the REACH classroom is about building skills and strategies. It's not about doing school where we're learning specific things, but we're laying a foundation that these kids can then apply with research and problem solving and critical thinking across the board with topics that they're interested in and work that they're doing. Yeah. So it's not about making them better. It's not about doing more school. The REACH program is parallel to the classroom. It's not really intended to be an extension of the classroom. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think there's one more question. The question was whether IQ tests are being given anymore, and yes, they are. There's a whole variety of IQ tests. There's still the Stanford-Binet. There's a Woodcock-Johnson. Many of them take a very long time to give, like the better part of a day. So that is both for philosophical reasons of we're trying to gauge potential and also logistical reasons we don't use them.
IQ tests are often used in a full battery of tests as an at-risk student is being assessed. And an IQ test will be administered and I think really wisely, to determine if we're dealing with profound giftedness. Because sometimes the indicators of problem behaviors or emotional behaviors, well, if we find that we're working with a profoundly gifted personality, there's another way to work with that child effectively. But I think that it's worthwhile to see that you have an IQ that's in the profound range, which would be 145 and above, right? Well above the average or norm.
And I should clarify, when I said we, I do mean the REACH program. The district does use IQ tests in our special services department. Right. Thank you very much for coming this evening. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.